You all know we're here today to talk about VCAP, the Vermont COVID-19 Agriculture Assistance Program, specifically the Agriculture and Working Lands application. So this is the third of 3 of VCAP applications that have been released. The application is live as of this morning and accepting applications on a first come, first served basis. And we'll go through plenty of details about all of that as we go through the presentation today. So I'll talk briefly about the legislation, which many of you are familiar with already, as well as eligibility for those who are interested in applying for a payment. We'll talk about the program timeline as far as the application and review itself. Then we will go into a little bit of a deeper dive on the application itself, and I won't go as far into detail as I probably will with those who will be applying, because we do have a lot of resources available for those who are applying, but we'll take a look. At least you'll get a view of what the system looks like in a very brief form, and then share some resources and information, and as we said, have time for questions and answers at the end. So at the bottom of this slide, you'll see the link to the VCAP webpage on our agency website, which is the home base for this application, as well as the 2 others that are currently live, the dairy and the fairs applications. And so if you bookmark that, you'll be able to access information about all of them, including this one, and updates are being made pretty regularly as new resources and information is being shared with us and finalized. So please make note of that. Just a word on state partners. So this application and program specifically is a partnership with the Working Lands Enterprise Board, Vermont Economic Development Authority, so VEDA, who will be helping to review applications during this cycle, our agency, Agriculture, Food and Markets, as well as Agency of Commerce and Community Development, who of course are running the economic recovery grants, and as well the Department of Finance and Management, who aren't here but who will be on this list, but are handling the payments for the program as well. So just a shout out to our lovely state partners. Here's a note on the state legislation that was passed with hyperlinks to the acts and the bills that were signed by the governor earlier this month and last month. And these bills enabled the agency to combine a multitude of streams of COVID relief funding into a total of $8.5 million to be made accessible through this application, the Agriculture and Working Lands Assistance application. So as many of you probably know, this is the Federal Coronavirus Relief Fund that was created as part of the CARES Act that's allowing these funds to be made available to businesses. And the funds therefore are intended to be used for market losses and expenses that are directly related to COVID-19. So these are funds specifically for businesses within the agriculture and forestry sectors, and we'll talk more about that in the eligibility section coming up here in just a minute. Here is the program timeline as far as application and funding goes. So as I mentioned, the application opened today and a press release is going out as well. So information is starting to be distributed around to the public about the application and the eligibility. And we are on our one and only provider webinar today, but there will be 3 webinars for potential applicants starting this Friday the 21st. So please make note of the 3 dates and times. These are also on our website, and share them with anyone you know who's interested in applying. Those will be recorded as well, and then of the 3, we'll take the best recording and post it on our website for those who aren't able to make any of the 3 times. The application period is through October 1st. However, as Abby mentioned, this application is different from the others in the COVID-19 relief stream because it's awards are granted on a first come, first served basis. So we're fully expecting that the possibility that all of the $8.5 million will be expended prior to October 1st, but if not, the deadline still stands of that time period. So between today and October 1st, or whichever time the funds are expended before that date, applications will be reviewed in order of submission by our VITA helpers and confirmed by our agency staff, and that's a 1 to 2 week time frame for applications. And then as they trickle in and are approved, payments will be issued, again, first come, first serve, and the payment processing time is up to 2 to 3 weeks. So we're looking at a total of 3 to 5 weeks between the time someone submits an application. Potentially edits may need to be made, approval processes are gone through, and payments are processed. And the payments are not direct deposit. They're all, for those that will be approved, are paper checks for this application. Whoops. Okay, so now we'll get into eligibility a little bit for this particular program. So we've got a few bullets here around the business, of course, being located within Vermont and having no active violations with our agency or natural resources. And if the business has any other current agreements with the state, that those are being upheld and compliance is being met. COVID-19 related revenue loss or expenses must have been incurred. And so we're talking about things that have happened since March 1st of this year that normally would not happen, as the business would not have incurred these costs normally, but have incurred them directly as a result of the public health emergency. And also, to be eligible for these funds, a business cannot have received funding from any other state COVID-19 recovery program. And just to be clear, that is specifically those programs that are funded with federal COVID relief funds. So those include the Economic Recovery Grant. We're talking also about the other grants within our agency, with the exception of dairy producers and processors, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So they do have a little bit of a loophole within this application. And that not to be confused with recipients of federal aid, because we know many businesses have received one or more forms of aid. So the only catch there is that the same exact costs or losses cannot be claimed in this application if they've already been covered with federal aid, but receiving PPP or EIDL or other federal program support does not preclude you from applying for this. So eligibility is based on business type, which is confirmed by each business's tax ID number. So that's the first important piece of information that applicants will need to have handy. And here we have a bulleted list of business types that are eligible to apply, starting with agriculture businesses, including farms, commercial processors, and slaughterhouses, as well as farmers markets. Value-added food product businesses, and that does encapsulate quite a variety of types of value-added products that we're aware of. Forest products businesses, and we do have some information on each one of these categories as we keep moving. Dairy producers or processors, and agriculture producer associations. So it's a wide range of business types, and businesses will be asked to not only identify their category, but as we mentioned, include their tax ID number, and then the content of the application that they'll be required to complete and submit may be slightly different based on the type of business category that is selected. So here are our notes about farms. So farms that are in active operation, and I won't read through all of the details here, but I will mention that it's for farms that cannot also be eligible under the Dairy Assistance Program, and there may be some questions about this at the end, and I'm actually still learning the fine details as well, so our lovely other staff can help answer questions and provide clarity there. Farms must demonstrate an annual income of $10,000 or more from ag products, and specifically within the time frame that we're mentioning here. So a lot of the eligibility is determined by 2019 revenue and tax information that is requested in the application. So if a farm did not meet this threshold, then they would not be eligible. Commercial processors and slaughterhouses, there's regulations mentioned here. And so if they meet the official definition of either of these terms, then they are eligible to apply. Farmers markets, events or series with 2 or more vendors of agricultural products. So as we know, in Vermont, we have many lovely options of organizations who meet this definition, so they are also eligible. So getting a little further into the detail on agriculture businesses, there are 2 scenarios that ag businesses can fall under in order to be eligible. So in the first case, a business must have been active as of March 1st of this year and is currently open for business without a net profit between March and August 1st, and clearly as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And if that scenario doesn't apply to a certain business, they can still be eligible if they were open and active as of mid-February, the 15th of this year, and is either currently open or has a good faith plan to reopen. And that's something that they would certify in the application. And if the business was profitable between March and August 1st, then the following information also must apply. So having at least a W-2 employee, which can include the owner, not under bankruptcy and in good standing with the state of Vermont. So again, we know that there's a lot of sort of little bits and pieces involved in the eligibility criteria. So we will have this information available as well as in multiple places on our website. So we hope that this is just one place of many that you will be able to access this for yourselves and for any applicants that you may be assisting. As far as value-added food product businesses, here's the definition that we have. A producer of raw, cooked, or processed edible substances, beverages, or ingredients, with a few other pieces of specificity here. So quite a handful of options available for value-added food product businesses under the ag category. We also have forest product businesses who are eligible thanks to our partnership with the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative. So these are the 2 bullet points that apply here. So those businesses engage in managing, harvesting, trucking, processing, manufacturing, crafting, or distributing. And I won't continue to read because I know all of you can do that. And hopefully if this applies to a certain business, they are aware of that. And it looks like forest product businesses consulting is also eligible. Raw milk producers are eligible to apply, which is not the same case for the dairy application under the VCAP program that's also currently live at this time. So that did not capture those producers, but they can be captured under this application. Any dairy producer or processor that has applied under the Dairy Assistance Program cannot apply for those same losses or expenses that fall under their dairy operation in this application. That would clearly be duplicative, and so that's something to remember, that even though producers and processors are eligible to apply, they cannot create a duplicate application with the same losses and expenses that they're already claiming. And I believe this is our last category, producer association. So based in Vermont, a nonprofit producer association group. And as we know, those relate to many different types of ag products. And we have many great support groups throughout the state and trade organizations that would fall in this category. So we're happy to have a fairly broad scope of eligibility as far as business types go, and are happy to answer questions about whether or not folks fall within any of these categories if they don't already know that. Here's one last piece, or a few last pieces of additional sector eligibility criteria. So we mentioned gross annual income, and that will be defined by the gross revenue and documentation that supports that of the 2019 calendar year. Businesses that have been open and active as of February 15th and are either currently operating or have a plan to reopen with one or more W-2 employees, not in bankruptcy and in good standing with the state. So we did mention that already, but good to reiterate all of those terms. So here we have a few examples of losses and expenses that are eligible to include in the agriculture and working lands application. And we know that there's a wide variety of items that people will be claiming, but here are some examples, and those that will probably be the more common ones, including loss in revenue due to reduction in sales or market demand, product loss, workplace changes to accommodate any number of factors related to the pandemic, including PPE and sanitation supplies, or a shifting of working environment to accommodate distancing, equipment purchases, packaging changes. So as you can see, there's a wide variety of eligible losses and expenses, and we do, of course, have the ability for folks to enter other documented losses and expenses that aren't specifically called out in the list that exists in the application. So within that application, we'll see a little bit later how it's structured for people to be able to enter the information about each item that they're claiming. And just a reiteration that specific expenses or losses claimed in this application for payment cannot already have been covered through other COVID-19 relief funding to avoid duplicate payments. Here are a few things to consider from the tax perspective. So losses and expenses under multiple operation types can be included in this application. So if your business grows vegetables and also has a sugaring operation, and you had losses that related to both related to COVID-19, then certainly both can be included if your business has multiple operations under the same tax ID number. If the business has multiple operations and each have their own tax ID number, those would then need to be entered in separate applications because each application should only be associated with one tax ID number. So the requirement that you may not be eligible for funding if you have already received another state CRF COVID relief funding payment doesn't apply if you have multiple tax ID numbers. So if you received one payment under one legal business operation, of course, you can then apply for this opportunity under your different operation with a separate tax ID number. Taxable income. So these payments are all considered taxable, which is something to consider from an accounting standpoint. So anyone who receives a payment will also receive a 1099-G form for the tax year 2020, which is different than our other typical grants we administer in our agency. Here are the funding category ranges. So if businesses meet the other eligibility criteria that we've already talked about, then here are the funding caps based on annual gross revenue. And again, this is to be verified with 2019 income statements and tax return, and as opposed to 2020, which of course we're still in the middle of. 2019 would allow businesses to fall in one of these ranges, with 10,000 being the minimum. So I won't read through all of them, but there's 5 different categories here that show you, depending on as a business where you fall, the maximum amount that you can apply for. And the application itself won't reveal that. Once the application, or once the range has been selected, the application is not going to tally up how much you've applied for and whether or not you've exceeded your cap. So applicants will have to kind of keep track of that on their own. And of course, if more expenses and losses are entered than are allowable and they exceed the cap, then an approved applicant will still only receive the maximum payment for their revenue range. Here are the key steps within the application process, just for consideration from kind of a bird's eye view. We really recommend that folks do a lot of reading up front as far as the eligibility and the application process and all the documentation that's needed, so that once folks are sitting down to actually complete the application, that they have all that sort of ammunition and foundational knowledge in mind, as well as the documents that are needed to be uploaded. We have a lot of folks who have worked on the dairy application who reach stumbling points when they get to that upload because those pieces aren't collected yet. So starting with collecting the documentation that's needed and accessing the online application system. So this is a good place to just share a reminder that paper applications aren't accepted for this opportunity. It's only online. The first step is registering as a user in the application system. So if a business has already registered and applied for a dairy application or another state CRF application that they didn't receive funding for, or maybe are still waiting to hear back from, they then already have an active username and an account in the system. So they don't need to register again and can simply go to the login page and to be able to create a new application that's relevant to this category. And we'll go through some screenshots of what that looks like in a few minutes. Then, of course, completing and submitting the application and status updates regarding the application, as well as payment approval, will be sent by email to the primary account holder within the application system. So those are sort of the applicant steps. And then on the review side, VITA will be reviewing the applications as they come in their respective order, and then verified by Agency of Agriculture staff. Those that have been approved or denied will be communicated by our agency, and then if approved, sent to Department of Finance and Management for payment processing. And again, as I said, they'll be sending paper checks in the mail to those that are approved. Here's a list of several documents that are needed for completing an application. So as we mentioned, tax information is sort of primary within this application. And so a W-9 is not needed for uploading, but the information that is stated within the W-9 is needed to be entered line by line as one of the first parts of the application. So making sure that businesses know what their legal structure is, what their legal name or doing business as name is before they sit down, as well as having a 29 tax return handy, and the upload is required for that to confirm the business category for eligibility of funding, because as we said in the very beginning, there's 3 different pieces of legislation that are braided into this opportunity. So we need to be able to verify the business type and which bucket they fall into. Documentation of all expenses and losses related to COVID-19 that are being claimed within the application. And again, that means not those that have been already reimbursed or paid for by other state or federal aid, and specifically those that are related to the eligible business operations that we've talked about. And each one of those items will need to be fully documented. So lost revenue will need to be documented through monthly income statements or a profit and loss that at least shows the monthly breakdown of income. And we'll see what that upload section looks like later as well. And then receipts, invoices, and other accounting paperwork that shows the purchase of any additional items related to COVID-19 or any other losses. So we know that it's a lot to get all that information together, but in order for an item to be approved for payment, it has to have clear documentation, not only of the dollar amount that's requested, but that it's falling within the time frame and that it's specifically related to COVID-19. So we definitely encourage businesses to include everything that they think may be eligible. And if they're including a cost or a loss that is not eligible, unbeknownst to them, that won't cause their application to be tossed out. It just means that that particular item won't be considered, but the rest of their application will still move forward for consideration. So tips for a successful application, we recommend that because there's quite a plethora of resources that are being updated continually at this point about the program, that applicants review information on our website, and there is a pretty substantial list for a bulleted list called How to Apply, which is really wise to follow, and that has links to other resources to be able to review, just to get mentally prepared for everything that they're about to encounter before the application even is started online. Once that's been done and someone's ready to begin an application, we recommend using an updated internet browser, and that does not unfortunately include Internet Explorer. We've tested it and Internet Explorer is not compatible with the application, so please avoid using that. The application auto saves by individual page, and there are, I believe, 8 or 9 different pages within this particular application. So it does not need to be completed all in one sitting. It will save, and you can re-log in and return to where you left off at any given point. But if you're in the middle of one of those pages and walk away, or your page times out, then the information on that page is likely to be lost. So just a note to folks as they are working through applications to complete and save a certain page before walking away. Once applications can be submitted, they can't be reopened or edited again. And completed applications can be viewed from the dashboard. So there is a review phase where you can look at the entire application before it's submitted to make sure everything is accurate. And then once the submission has happened, you can also log in and look at the application contents that you have submitted at any time, or print from this screen as a reference. So that is a capability that we have. And also just a reminder that, this application is first come, first serve, which is different than the others. And so we recommend that although applicants don't waste time in applying, days or weeks later than they had intended, that they also follow the steps that are recommended and read all the information that's provided initially, just because if edits are needed or if there's incomplete portions, then it will take additional time, obviously, to make corrections and get them back into the queue for review and consideration. So just a note to review those how to apply steps and follow them and make sure that kind of all the bases are covered before moving forward, just to save everybody time and make sure that the submission and review process is as efficient as it can be. So speaking to those applicant resources, this again is the same link to this link is specific to the Agriculture and Working Lands program. So the link we provided earlier was to all of the VCAP programs, but this hyperlink will take applicants to a page where there is a very comprehensive overview of eligibility, of the payment structure, or excuse me, the business structures that are eligible, as well as guides to the application. So the application guide, there's not a hyperlink here, but it is on this webpage, is actually a step-by-step PDF that takes an applicant through the application with pointers and explanations of what's needed. That's just a little more verbose, a little more elaborate than the application prompts itself. So we really recommend, especially for any who are less tech savvy, to read that guide or even have it open while the application is being completed. This page also has, and the VCAP primary page has a chat bot where you can enter questions. If you happen to have already read all this information and still have questions, it's an automated chat feature where you can have your questions answered, hopefully effectively. Then there will also be FAQ. So frequently asked questions across the 3 webinars that we're hosting for applicants will be recorded by our lovely staff, and then we'll compile those questions that folks are asking the most commonly and post the responses to this web page. And of course, the webinar recording that we arrive at after the 3 sessions that we have starting this Friday and ending next week, and any associated materials will all be available here. So this is sort of the applicant one-stop shop at this link for all of the most up-to-date information about applying. And so make a note of these. So we have a few slides here that will help demonstrate sort of a visual of what the application looks like. Some of you might be familiar with it if you've already been in the system to look at the dairy application. It's a very similar layout. So this at the top is the hyperlink that will take you right to the registration page. So again, if a business has already registered for another type of application under the state programs, then they don't need to do that again. But for the majority, this will be the first course of action, is visiting this home registration page, where the first thing that they will encounter is sort of this letter, Dear Vermont Business Owner, with a bulleted listing of the program criteria. And so they're just asked to read and acknowledge that before moving on to the rest of the registration process. And right below that will be this very basic registration form where they will enter their Vermont employer ID number. And once that's entered, the business name will automatically populate in this company box. If for some reason the business can't locate their number, they can simply click the Add Company link and fill out a basic form with their business information to be added into the system, and then complete the applicant user registration form below. So this is the contact information that essentially is the holder of the application. It's the first step before an application can be started. And so really the primary business contact or business owner should be the one whose information is here, as well as the email address. This email address entered on the registration page will be the one where status updates about the application are sent. And so certainly should be an address that folks check regularly. The username will actually be created by default. That's kind of why it's grayed out right here in the username box, because it will default to something that the system generates, either the email address or email with a few characters after it. And the password will have to be manually created, and there are a few particular items to keep in mind. They have to contain a letter, number, and at least one special character, and have to be greater than 10 characters long. And of course, this information is in the applicant guide as well. So just a basic registration form as the first step, and that will take you into the dashboard, which is this screen with the sort of blue title up at the top, and then the new application button is up here kind of tucked into the corner, and that's what will allow folks to begin a new application. And as opposed to clicking the title Agriculture and Working Lands, they'll actually come down here to the select button, and that will enable them to begin a new application. So after that is done, the application navigation screen will come up. And as you can see, there are steps 1 through 9, and the system will prompt the user to move forward in numerical order. But you can kind of see that this is highlighted blue, so whichever page you're on stays highlighted, and you can move forward or back at any point to review what you've done. And again, it will save each page as it's fully completed. So this page 1 is applicant information, where the legal tax information needs to be entered. So that W-9 information that we were talking about. So that's applicant information page 1. Moving through those first steps, 1 through 6, the application pages individually, the first primary content after that tax information is eligibility, and there's quite a range of questions here that are probably too small for most of you to read, but they speak to a lot of the bulleted points that we talked about earlier, just to confirm eligibility before the business moves into the rest of the application. So compliance with state regulations, active business operation, and then of course bill eligibility refers to the business category that they fall under, and therefore which piece of legislation their potential funding would fall under, which is something more important for our staff to know than anyone else. But it will then prompt the user or the applicant to complete a number of questions based on their business category. And this is where the tax return needs to be uploaded, as well as information about revenue, W-2 employees, kind of all of the eligibility information that we mentioned before will be combined into questions on these 2 eligibility pages. So after the applicant tax information and eligibility information has been entered, they will move into the portion where we mentioned where documentation is requested for changes in revenue that between this year and last year, as well as other economic harm, which is essentially all of those other COVID-19 related losses and expenses that we talked about. So as you can see, we recommend having everything in hand before these sections are reached. And revenue is something important to point out, is each month needs to be manually selected for when those changes in revenue are being reported. So if a business particularly lost revenue within a certain period of time, they would check the months for which that applies and then enter their revenue during that month for both 2019 and 2020. And then to the right of that, there's an upload for that documentation for each month of 2019 and 2020. So we're looking for income statements here. So a profit and loss statement, an accounting report that shows the revenue from the monthly revenue from each year. We know that some people have big, large reports that break it down by individual month, and so it's fine if that's the case to upload the same document for each month, as long as it shows the monthly breakout, but certainly the preference would be to have the individual months uploaded here. So the upload is a standard upload button where you can select anything from your computer, your desktop, or you can also drag and drop files from your computer right into the internet browser and they will upload. The other economic harm section is slightly more complex, just in the fact that it's lengthy and has a lot of different options of potential expenses or losses related to COVID-19 that businesses can select and confirm that that applies to them. And so this is just an example that we've drawn out of the probably 10 or 12 examples that are listed. PPE, personal protective equipment, if that applies, they would check the box and then right underneath would have to enter the incurred cost related to that item, upload documentation that shows that that cost that was incurred, whether it's a paid invoice or receipt or a combination of things that support that cost. And then there's a drop-down menu for the reason that that item was incurred and a place for description. So it's a lot, certainly, but we want to be thorough and make sure that businesses are able to get paid for everything that they are eligible to receive payment for. So this little checkbox has this as the first example, but there's the others that we mentioned that fall underneath, as well as 5 other categories. So if there are things that aren't specifically mentioned in the list that the business has incurred, then they would be able to enter miscellaneous costs and describe what those are, and then provide all the same documentation that the others are asking for. So the next to last step is reviewing the application, and this is a screen that will show an applicant the entire contents that they've entered so far. The only difference is they won't be able to directly open their attachments in the review screen, but they will be able to see all of the text and checkbox answers that they've provided throughout all the other application pages. So it's a good opportunity to make sure everything is complete and correct. If it's not, they can click the back button to go back through each page individually. Unfortunately, this system's navigation doesn't allow you to click around randomly between all the different application pages. You just have to go either back one by one or next one by one, or you can go back to the dashboard and revisit the application from the very beginning, which is a good option to make sure everything is correct. And the last, underneath the review, you'll find the attestation statements, which basically are legal statements that the business owner should be reading thoroughly and agreeing to. So if any of you on the call are helping someone with their application, this is not a section to overlook and something that the business owner should be able to accurately acknowledge and attest to each one of these as sort of a final application certification. And then that leads you to the very last step, which is the electronic signature. Once the signature is typed in, the signature date will automatically populate here, and then the application will be considered certified and able to be submitted. There's the friendly submit button right there, and then confirmation will be received. A confirmation screen will pop up with a number to record, as well as some follow-up prompts if further support is needed. If you click, you can simply close out, or if you click finish, then you'll be directed back to the dashboard where you can view this in full. So that was a very quick run through of a slightly complex application. So thanks for bearing with me. And again, the PDF application guide has a lot more detail than this, if you can believe it. There's even more screenshots for anyone who's really excited to go through that or might need it in helping them to go through the application step by step. So knowing that that's a lot to undertake, and especially with the clock ticking, we have a range of support options for anyone who's applying, and would direct people initially to the automated chat feature where we've preloaded the responses to common questions. So at that VCAP homepage, folks can type in their questions and receive hopefully the response that they need. And if that's not sufficient, then we have a hotline number as well as a COVID response email address that are listed here. We do anticipate this week and next week, and just as time goes on, that we'll have sort of a higher volume of people accessing these things. So it's our goal to respond as quickly as possible, but obviously within the order that inquiries are received. So thanks in advance for your patience if you're trying to communicate through those venues. And then hopefully some of you will also be providing assistance to applicants, whether it's just advisement on whether or not to apply, on their eligibility, on some of the other things that we've talked about today. But we do have the link to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Forum, the Vermont Housing Conservation Board Farm and Forest Viability Program Advisor connection point there. So we know that's one really helpful place to go. And then this link above that says General Assistance has a list of business support organizations. Many of you are on this list. And again, as Abby mentioned, if you're willing to be highlighted as someone who could provide a specific type of support for this opportunity, then we're certainly willing to call you out and share your information directly. So we hope that through this range of options that everyone will find what they need as far as support goes. And to those of you who have already provided support on the dairy application and may be considering offering different types of support or just generally supporting businesses during this really challenging time, thank you for all of your really hard work. We know that everyone is super busy and losing sleep and doing the best they can. So thank you all. It's definitely a team effort to pull things like this off. This is just a reminder of our agency's homepage, our website, where there's always a red stripe in the middle for folks to click on to access COVID-19 relief information. There's press releases, events, and again, information that's updated essentially every day based on the evolving nature of COVID response work, as well as the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative page, which lives as its own entity, and that will have information about this funding opportunity, as well as those that will be emerging later in the year for the fiscal year 2021 service provider and business grants, and that those are coming at a little bit of a delay this year because of the state budget timeline, but two great websites just to review for current information and other business support mechanisms. So that is all we have for today. That was fairly long-winded, so thanks everyone for hanging in and absorbing all the information you could. And if you didn't, then you can watch the recording later or reach out to any of us